I feel the same way. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Angular Services. Let's talk about them a bit. So, services are an example of an architecture pattern. So, components, that's another example of an architecture pattern. This is how we organize the app. So if components can have a hierarchy, and they can, that's like, you got some root level component. That's got some children, each of which has some children, each of which has children. All the way down. So what we learned about yesterday is data down, actions up. So if we want to pass data into something, it needs to go that direction. If we want to communicate from child to parent, goes the other way. This fires off an event. I'm going to use black. Fires off an event. Events go up to here. So data down, actions up. Any new questions come up about that concept? Cool. So there's also the idea of cross-cutting concerns. Great example. What user is logged in right now? That's not the responsibility necessarily of any one of these components. It's something that any component might want to know. And so we have this extra layer over here of services. And the way this works is that any component can access something from a service. The hierarchy of the overall structure just doesn't matter. You can also use this for data. So you're making API requests. Have a service make the request, and then any component that needs that data, have it ask for it from the service. These can go both directions. Services can depend on other services. So these can have a relationship also. Services, components. Nine times out of 10, a service is just a class. Doesn't have to be, though. Could be an object, could be a function. Any value is legal as a service. Most of the time, we just use a class, though. All right, that's how services and components fit together conceptually. Questions about that?
It looks like a node tree to me.
A little bit. So the components are a node tree for sure, because they're like basically just an abstraction on the DOM. And so like we can think of a component tree a lot like a DOM. Services are a little bit more like a graph. So difference is, come on, there we go, got it. So the difference is tree looks like this, goes in a particular direction. Every single node on here always has exactly one parent. So like that's not allowed because then it would have two parents. No such restriction on a graph. Graphs also have nodes, but they can connect any which way. Something can have more than one parent. Something can circle back on itself. So that's a tree. That's a graph. And really, services don't even need to connect with each other. They can. They're not required to, though. So you can have like little standalone nodes too. More questions?
So you said some like services are for the application-wide things.
Yes.
So even if it's as simple as just like a user is logged in property that's just Boolean true or false, instead of passing that down through hundreds of different components, you just inject it into everything with the service.
Nailed it. Could not have put it better myself. That's exactly what it is. A mistake a lot of people make when they find out about services, they put too much stuff in services. You still need component state. So things that are specific to that component, like whether or not it's active, that's component state. That's not application state. I'll give you another example. So I once worked on an LMS that had like a integrated audio and video track or whatever, and like you could start and stop and find out what track was playing and stuff from like all over the app. That meant that like I would have an audio service that was in charge of managing those songs, and any component could access that. Or another one might be what I do in our LMS, all of the curriculum is provided by one service. So any component can figure out, like, if I have a slug is the part of the URL that identifies a particular post in the LMS. I have a service that will give you back all of the content for any slug. I don't know which components will or won't need that. And so I just have that all exposed as a service. Some of them need it for routing. Some of them need it to display the content. Sometimes like it's needed to figure out what the next post is. Like that's also a service that I expose. Does this have a next thing in a sequence? And if so, what is it? All that stuff is provided through a service. Also, all of your performances, all of those are provided through a service. Because I use them in all kinds of different places. I use it when I'm evaluating your work. I use it in like whatever the equivalent of a grade book is in this, where it just shows what everybody's performances have been over time. I also use those for activity tracking. So like I can just see what my last 10 evaluations were. I also use that to filter down your stuff so that when I'm trying to like come up with a representative work sample for Andy or Tiffany or Matt, I can like ask the service to narrow that down by name and then just get those performances back. All that stuff is handled by a service, not any one component. The components consume the data from that, and sometimes they even like transform that data a little bit, but the like source of truth for it is a service. More questions or observations about services? So services make their way into a component through a process called dependency injection. Angular is the only front-end framework that uses dependency injection, but dependency injection is used all over the OOP world. And that's like it's a pretty big part of Spring Boot also. So not the last time we'll see this idea, but the idea is that if I have a class, I have a constructor, I can, the parameters that I give this constructor, because keep in mind, we normally don't use the constructor at all. If we want to get something into a component, we use like the input decorator. We like bind it to a property. So we normally don't use the constructor. So we can put any parameters that we want in here. And if the type of them matches one of our services, that service gets added to the component. This is another one of like the most magical things that Angular does. It looks at these types in the constructor and goes, oh, this thing is supposed to use the HTTP client service? Badass. I will inject that into this component. That's what the yellow lines are here. That service gets injected in, and then like there's something called HTTP on this component, has access to all of the properties and methods and stuff on that service.
And in this same class file, Kyle, you would have to import the HTTP client service as well?
Bingo.
Okay.
And like, actually, this is kind of an interesting thing. You're not importing the service, you're importing that type. Because check out like the thing with the red underline. That's type level code. That's not value level code. We're not actually importing the service because the service is being injected by Angular. That's how the actual like code and stuff gets in there. We're importing the type and annotating some parameter with that type, and that's how Angular knows that it's supposed to inject it. It's a very weird nuance. Something else that throws people off with dependency injection. We don't actually need to do anything in the body of this constructor. We give this an access modifier, and then we're done. There already is a this.http. It gets assigned. Don't worry about it. Preguntas. Dependency injection is another one of these input-output kinds of ideas. Oh my, I cannot say enough great things about ThinPen. I'm so happy with this thing. So dependency injection, also called DI. The overall principle of dependency injection is instead of every class being responsible for making new instances of other class that it depends on, fuck that. Pass them in. So, like, if we bring this back to old school JavaScript, something like map. Remember when we were writing map by hand? So for this to double, it needs a function that does that. So I could define the function that does that inside of here, or I could inject it in. That's the broad idea of dependency injection. I have a function that depends on another function. So rather than defining that function in here, I inject it in. That function's a dependency, so I give it the dependency instead of making it its responsibility to find that in the global scope or any other thing. In Angular, there's an injector that does all the hard work for us. All we need to do is use the type. Questions about dependency injection? All right, let's make a service. So let's make a new Angular app. Follow along if you'd be so kind. So I'm going to npx Angular CLI new. This is going to be Angular service practice. So for this one, we're gonna have a Pokemon service. So I'm gonna have, let's see, this will be the app component. And it's going to have a, it's going to have like a Pokemon display. Component inside of it. And then we will have a Pokemon service over here, and this this component over here, that's going to get that injected in. All right. So here I am in this newly scaffolded out project. Why don't you take a second to get caught up? All right, once you've done that, let's npx ng generate that Pokemon display. Oop, come on, dude. It's Wednesday for all of us. All right, ng generate component Pokemon display. And then while we're at it, we're going to npx ng generate service Pokemon. So that made this Pokemon.service file, made these Pokemon display things. All right. I'm going to fire up the server. I'm going to take a peek at that service file that got created. The thing that makes something a service is the injectable decorator. It gets added for you automatically. But that's what makes the whole dependency injection thing work. That, and if we check our app module, did it get added in there? Nope, doesn't need that. Oh, it's because it's it says it here. The root injector is sort of like kind of similar to that app module thing. It's the highest level, so every component can inject Pokemon service. So what we're going to do, we're going to start by just hard coding. We can say something like Pokemon service dot Pokemon is an array of objects with Pikachu, Bulbasaur, Charmander. Take a second to catch up. While you're doing that, changed my mind. We're going to inject this into the app, and then we're going to pass it down into Pokemon display. Yeah. We're going to inject that here. Questions so far? One other thing I want to do. Let's make a type. And then annotate this as being an array of Pokemon. Good to go? All right. So back over in the app component TS file. So actually, let's go to the app component HTML file and blow out all the boilerplate. And then back in the TS file for app component, and get rid of that title. So we need to do two things. We need to import the type, which if you import the class, you also import the type. It's a cool trait. It has a neat name in TypeScript. It's called like buddy imports or something like that. So if I import from Pokemon service like that, so that's step one. Step two, declare it in a constructor. So I'm going to call it Pokemon service. And it's an instance of Pokemon service. Make it private. Cool. Now app component has access to that service. I've injected it into the component. If I want to do something with it, like say make those Pokemon that I declared over here available, I could do something like I could say that there is such a thing as Pokemon over here, and that's an array of Pokemon. Since it doesn't get, since it needs that type, in a just world, we'd probably keep this type in its own file. For right now, YOLO, just copy it over. Be careful about putting anything like this in between a decorator and a class. The decorator and the class need to kiss. They need to be right next to each other.
Can you not export that type from the same file? From this
Yeah.
app? Yes.
I suppose I could. I like that. Good thinking. And it's probably mad that I haven't definitely assigned this. Yeah. So why don't we initialize that to an empty array? Now it should be substantially less angry with us. Questions about anything we've done so far?
Can I see your export again on the other file?
Yep, just put the word export in front of the type.
Okay.
More questions? All right. So over in the template, let's iterate through all of those Pokemon. Tie this into what we were doing this morning. So we could say something like NG4 Pokemon and all right, changed my mind. Let's call this Pokemon list. So each Pokemon in Pokemon list. Let Pokemon in Pokemon list. And for each one of them, we show Pokemon.name. Yeah. So all I did was change that to Pokemon list for the name of the property. Iterate through that. Show each of the little pokes. So right now, shouldn't have anything showing up on the screen because it's just an empty array. Questions? Cool. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the ng on init lifecycle method. So we'll say that this implements capital O on capital I init. And it's go, I don't think you do. So we need to import it. And then it's going to go, I don't think you do. Because we're trying to implement an interface and we're not fulfilling the interface. Interface says that we need to have an ng on init method, and we don't. So we add an ng on init method. Now it's not mad at us anymore. And then I can say this dot Pokemon service, or sorry, this dot Pokemon list equals this dot Pokemon service dot Pokemon. Where's my pokes? Let's see. Anything mad at me? All right, let's see. Let's debug. So if I go, oop, can't bind to ng4n, means I did this wrong.
Let Pokemon of Pokemon.
Come on, dude. All right, and there's my pokes. I have consumed a service.
Can I see your excuse me, your app component HTML file again? Oh, I'm missing a quote. There it is. Thank you.
Other questions about this?
Can you go back to that TypeScript file?
I certainly can. So, over in our Pokemon service, it's just a class. And it just has a property with some hard-coded stuff in it. We said that it was an injectable. And hey, while we were at it, we also exported the type. Over here, we injected that service. But first, we imported the type, and we imported the service's type. We injected it into this app component class. We initialized a property. And then when the component boots up, it sets Pokemon list to whatever's in the service. And then we do stuff with it in the template. Questions about services? At its most basic level, that's all that's going on. Now, we can also do things like HTTP requests which we're going to do next, but it's still the same structure. If we do HTTP, now we have to deal with observables, but it's otherwise not especially different.
Are there any advantages to using this rather than just putting or not using services at all and putting it in your TypeScript? Or
Sure. So let's say you did that. Let's go back to... All right, so let's say you have a component tree that kind of looks like this. And the Pokemon are needed here, here, and here. So the way that you would get that to all of those places is you would request the Pokemon in this file, and then you have to pass them down here, and then keep passing them down here, and keep passing them down here, and keep passing them down there, as well as passing them there, and there, and there. If you did that, no need for a service. This is called prop drilling, and it actually has like a handful of problems with it. So if you see yourself doing something like this, that's a pretty good sign that that might be better off being a service. Because with a service, now I've got, if this is the Pokemon service, I just inject it into that component, that component, that component, and that component. Skips the whole hierarchy. Also, it keeps your components a little bit more focused. These components should be concerned mostly with how data is being displayed. They shouldn't also be concerned with what that data is, where it comes from, like any of that shit. If you can keep the component purely focused on how is this data displayed, it makes your components a lot easier to understand. It makes them easier to test. It makes them easier to reuse. There's another way to think of it. If I have a component and I separate the component from its data, that means I can just plug in all kinds of different data sources. So if this thing doesn't manage the data itself, maybe this one is hard-coded. Maybe this one is for testing, just test data. Maybe this one is live. The component does not give a shit. I think this might be the thing that the React world gets the most wrong. And the Vue world is the most indifferent on and shouldn't be. And Angular and Ember got this right. If you separate out the display of data from like the storage and retrieval and caching and management of data, your app gets 1 billion times easier to understand. And test and refactor and like all that stuff. Services give you that. More questions? So let's say we want to do an API integration. HTTP requests come from Angular's built-in HTTP service. So to use the HTTP service, all right, John, I hope you're standing by. I'm probably going to need help with this again. Over here in the Pokemon service, the service is going to use the HTTP service. Because remember, service can use another service. HTTP is a service. Sort of makes sense that we would make it available over here. Works the same way. Gonna make a constructor. Private HTTP is HTTP client module, which needs to get in.
This should just be HTTP as an HTTP client.
Ah, bingo.
And lowercase on HTTP or H lowercase. It's title cased
Thank you.
or Pascal cased. Sorry.
Beautiful. And so that one is going to come in from, I think I got it, HTTP client comes from Angular common HTTP. Maybe? Yes? Yes!
And then in your app module TS, you also need to bring in the client module.
Beautiful. Probably from the same place, I'm guessing.
Same place, yes.
And then I need to import it. Cool. So those steps again. Import the HTTP client from Angular Common HTTP. Inject it into the constructor. And then an app module TS. Import HTTP client module from the same place and import it. It looks a lot like the browser module thing that's already there.
And these steps are in that Angular HTTP guide, which is part of the dynamic curriculum, so everyone can refer to that when they're confused.
Beautiful. So now that that's done.
Hang on just a second. Can you go back to the
Totally.
other?
Other questions thus far?
So I noticed you took out the app routing module on the imports. Maybe, I don't know
Did
why
I?
it wasn't.
I don't think I installed it to begin with.
Okay, maybe it's just on mine. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm caught up.
that's
Thank
like
you.
the first question they ask you on the CLI, and I take the default, which is no.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly where that came from. It's if you wanted routing on your app, since this is a simple one page, there was no reason to put routing in here.
You got it, sir. Cool. So now we have HTTP available in our Pokemon service. So what if I'm going to make a I'm going to say whenever this gets, let's see, can a service also do on a net? I think we're about to find out. Or implements. I'm going to do an ng on a net. All right, it's not mad at me so far. It's a good sign. So on a net, I'm going to this.http, which again came in from this constructor. It got injected. This replaces fetch. Does the same thing. So I'm going to do get, and then I'll do like HTTP colon / it should be S pokeapi.co /API/v2/Pokemon. And you know what? Never mind. I'm not going to do this in the ng on the net. I'm going to make this an observable. I'm just going to return the observable. So this will be called like Pokemon. Can I make it a getter? Comment this out. Oh, shoot. Then I'm going to need to type that response too. So that will be, I have another type called like Pokemon response. That's like results, and the results are an array of Pokemon. Then I can say that I am getting a Pokemon response. And then I can ditch this. Oops. All right. Type observable is missing. Ah, I see. It's because over here, that's still doing that. All right, so now we need to do this logic differently because it's not a synchronous value anymore. So this needs to be something like this.pokemon.subscribe. And then this is going to be, let's see, response comes back, and this.pokemon service.pokemon.subscribe. And then I take the response and set this.pokemon list to response.results. Hey, look, there you go. There they all are. So let's look at that a little slower. So now how this works is I have a getter called Pokemon that just returns that API request. I added a type so that I can type the response. That also makes the type of that response known all over my application, so all the places that are using it, like here. The reason this type works is it knows that response.results is a array of Pokemon. This.http.get, exact same thing as fetch. We could pass in this generic here to tell us what kind of thing comes back from the body. And then that's the URL that we're fetching. This gets returned out of here. And then we subscribe. So that Pokemon, that comes back as an observable. We subscribe to the response of the observable. We take it, set it. Pretty cool. That's services, man. Hit me with some questions.
Would you just put the response dot sprites if you needed the sprites to show up also?
So in that case, I would need to, this would have to be a little bit different because as you're probably all painfully aware at this point, the Pokemon list doesn't give you the sprites. So I would need to do that same kind of thing where I'm going through each of those. And maybe that's also on this service where like, maybe instead of making this one a getter, I make it just a regular method called list Pokemon. So that is the same thing. Maybe I also want a method that's like get Pokemon, and it takes in a name. And this one, it gets back an actual Pokemon. And cool. So now I've got a method for that. The response. See, I would also want to have a sprite that has a front default that's a string. And the other one doesn't have that, so it's optional. Okay. So the let's say I got back all of those Pokemon from the list. Maybe I need to, oh shit, I don't know how to do, I don't know what the equivalent of promise.all with the HTTP services, or with observables. Equivalent of promise.all with observables. Fork join. Apparently not anymore. Fork join. When all observables complete, emit the last emitted value from each. Right. Corresponding emissions from multiple observers. As they occur, no. And if one of them fails, it doesn't emit. Awesome. Similar to promise.all. Beautiful. All right, so it looks like it takes in a dictionary. And then the thing that gets returned back from that is the stuff. All right. I have no idea if this is going to work. Let's party. So I get all of these back. Instead of setting the Pokemon list to that, what if I take the results and I map out just the names? And then for each of those, no, I want to map each of those, I think. For each name, I want to call this.Pokemon, I want to return this.Pokemon service get Pokemon name. All right, so this will be like observables. And then I want to fork join those observables. And then I want to subscribe to the result of that. Or no, I need to see. So okay, right now that's an array. Maybe it'll take an array. Let's see. It's not mad about the type. That's good. Okay, so it fork joins that. I subscribe to it, and then the results that I get back should be all of those Pokemon. Let's see. This dot Pokemon list equals all Pokemon. All right, let's check it out. Hey, it still worked. Hey, that looks like all the stuff. So, moment of truth. Over in this template, can I make this a little bit more interesting? Could I say that's an image?
Can we pipe to title case those Pokemon while we're at it?
I assume that we could, yeah. Do you know the name of the
Title case.
It's just title case?
Yeah.
Sick. And then this source, what if I make it Pokemon.sprites.front default, and then make the alt text Pokemon.name. I suppose I could title case that too. And it's mad at me because sprites is optional. This might not be defined. Check out this trick. That seems like a mighty good case for ngIf. If Pokemon.sprites is defined, pretty sick. That's a hell of a lot easier than what we were doing with promises.
Can I see your whole HTML again?
Yeah.
It was blocked by the screen.
That's a pretty good sign that this should get broken up.
Can I see your app module TypeScript? Okay, thank you.
So this was the Pokemon service. This probably isn't like the greatest way to do this. We could probably like make this list Pokemon thing. Actually, shit, let's do that. All right, I don't want to make it too complicated. But I was going to say we could subscribe to this response and then do all this like fork join crap in there so that we're not doing it in this component. Because remember, trying to keep this a little bit lighter on logic and data management and stuff. This is kind of a lot of that. So like what we could do instead is we can put the subscription like back onto this. And so that might be something like dot subscribe, and then that was like response. And I think all the other logic is the same. So we can just take all of that. And instead of doing this part here, we could return the fork join. Now we can, since this isn't getting used anywhere else, we could make it private. If we want to expose that as a service also, we can also do that. All right, so now we've moved a lot of that logic over there. So now this one could probably be something like list Pokemon, subscribe, and then that's all Pokemon. All right, let's see if how hard I screwed the pooch on that. Property subscribe does not. I might have screwed it up too much. I'll figure out how that ends up working. I'll put it back. So walking from the top. The module needs the HTTP client module. That's what allows us to, it's where all the HTTP stuff is defined. It needs to get imported in. The Pokemon service that we defined injects in the HTTP service, which again is based off of HTTP client. That type comes in from here. Using HTTP, we use that instead of fetch to get stuff. The requests look like that. We, again, the design on this is questionable. We injected the service into the constructor of our component. We got a bunch of stuff. And then I think the logic on this is fine. I just don't necessarily like where it is. We turned an array of names into an array of observables. We used this cool fork join tool. It's just promise.all. Same thing. This is the equivalent to the .then on that. So we take all those full Pokemon objects that we get, set them to this class, and then since that stuff is bound over here, whenever that comes back and gets set, all of this renders. Can we get that? Preguntas.
And the ng4 is what bound all of that with when you make Pokemon of Pokemon list, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So anytime Pokemon list changes, all this re-renders.
So not to break everything, but when we originally wrote out our map, we were going to have an app component that had a component called Pokemon Display.
yeah.
You said you were going to pull it into the app and then pass it all the way down.
Yeah, let's do that. I think that all of this makes a pretty good. So if I do this and call this Pokemon Display. Why, that makes a mighty fine standalone component, doesn't it? I certainly think so. So let's do app Pokemon, or display, I guess it was. Pokemon Display HTML. And then we're going to copy paste all of that. Looks like it needs a Pokemon to work. Okay. That was app Pokemon Display. And we're going to pass in a Pokemon that's equal to the Pokemon. And then over in Pokemon display component TS, we need to tell it that we're expecting that. Pokemon display TS. Get rid of some boilerplate. Bring in input and say inputs Pokemon is a Pokemon. Oh no, we don't have the Pokemon type. So we can import that from our service too. And then it's probably going to want us to definitely assign that. I can also require it, which is fine. And if I do all that, everybody stops barking at me, and the Pokemon are still there. And look how much easier this Pokemon display component is to understand. It doesn't do any of that data fetching shit. All it knows is it gets a Pokemon object and then shows parts of it. It doesn't know that that was hard-coded, came from an API, was injected by a testing framework. Doesn't care. That's easier to understand. Questions? All right. Hope that helps. Hope we're feeling a little bit better about services. A little bit. You don't need to be an expert on this stuff. You'll use them in your group project, but like you've got the docs are great. You've got this video. You have each other. I think you're going to be all right. All right. I'm going to end this meeting. We'll do routing in a little bit. Give me a second. Thank you.